I was a nothing and a no one much before I came up with this idea. I found it overwhelming at times, sleep depriving, and I felt a real sense of imposter syndrome. We went meteoric. After about 5-6 years, we were in sort of 30, 40 countries. This is a real heavy weight. This is a real yoke around the shoulders that comes with an invisible responsibility and pressure that sometimes I'm not very good at processing. Somebody has deemed me worthy to wear the tights and velvet or take a position of responsibility. So I've got a choice. Either I can lean into it and be damned. And I picked up the phone and she said, "I'm really sorry, but the tests have come through and he's got leukemia."
Welcome to the New Chapters podcast, where I explore what happens after the pivot, the bold moves, the quiet resets, and of course, the powerful reinventions that shape extraordinary lives, proudly sponsored by Mylands. Well, this week, I'm pleased to say my guest is Sam Galsworthy. He's the co-founder of Sipsmith Gin, and he's taken the reins of Trewithen estate in Cornwall, his ancestral home, and he is now the High Sheriff of Cornwall by appointment of His Majesty the King. In the next 45 minutes, we'll hear all about that, as well as Sam's rapid-fire this or that responses when we get to know the person behind the public profile. So welcome, Sam. Thank you very much for joining me on New Chapters. And I suppose the best place to start is with this.
It's the best thing to start with gin, quite honestly, Isabel. Thank you,
Cheers
by the way.
to that.
I'm very touched to be included in here. But yeah, gin is a great place to start. And actually, I was a nothing and a no one much before I came up with this idea of trying to reinvigorate a category of spirit, of drink, and gin, a very British drink that was frankly somewhat staid, a little bit dry, forgive the pun, and just really not a lot of energy to it. I lived in America prior to that, working for Fuller's Brewery, and I got to see and witness a very exciting, it's a seismic shift, actually, in the way that consumers, punters over there, were buying their beer and indeed their whiskey, which was, back then, big was beautiful, and the more you sold, the more wondrous it was. And actually, there was a wonderful movement of consumers and an industry burgeoning around a bit of an anti that, a sort of counterculture where small was beautiful. And actually, people were really trying to understand how things are made, where things are made, with what they were made, by whom they were made, and that story, the connective tissue that brings the answers of all those things together, and ultimately to form a story. And people were up for paying a bit more for that. People had assumptions that things would taste better, that there would be a bit of social capital about telling the story, the sense of discovery that they had played as they shared it with their friends, early evening, over dinner, or gifted, or whatever it may be. And that was the genesis, the lightning strike of Sipsmith was this movement. And London, which had at the time, and I'm talking now in 2001, 2002, 2003, the sort of kernels of this notion of craft, a much now overused words perhaps, but back then, this idea of craft there was a mystery to it. There was something really special, and that ultimately what craft produces was meaningfully different. And in fact, we like to think of it as being distinctive rather than different. And different is something perhaps that's rationally different: price, size, flavor, power. Whereas distinctiveness was really for us about the nuances, about the little touches, and about the stickiness of a brand, of a product, of a person, of a service. So it's not just about booze and food, actually. Yeah. It can be applied to everything. And we had seen this movement occur in London through microbreweries, not so much in distilleries and that. And we just thought, wow, wouldn't it be great? And actually, the end of this bit of the story, I suppose, is Fairfax, my business partner. He was at Diageo at the time, and he was like, "I'm in. Let's do it. Let's jump ship." We quit our jobs on the very same day, and we went to the government and we said, "Right, we're ready. We've got this business plan. Give us a license to set up a gin distillery. We want to be the first distillery for a good long time, maybe 200 years, I think our records showed." And they said, no, you can't have a distillery because there's a law in 1821 that stopped anyone from owning. I know. It
So
was
there you are
draconian.
coming in from the States where everything's sort of eased, I don't know, just sort of slick, I suppose. And, people are really keen to do stuff. And then you get stuck in archaic British law and no's.
Absolutely.
Is that so?
Well,
How long did it take you to sort that little stumbling block out?
yeah, I mean, you're right. Pro-growth, pro-entrepreneurship, failure is celebrated, take risk, be fearless. And I brought that with me. I mean, I didn't inherit that from anything that I experienced in England, but brought that over. And you're right. And it was sort of almost seemingly anti-growth and holding on to the past too much. And so, but driven by this sense of, shame almost from this sort of having not done a bit of research in advance to say that there was, in fact, a massive impediment to our vision. Having quit our jobs, we went all out to convince local members of parliament and Westminster specifically. We went to present to their all-party spirits community or committee. And
that sounds like the kind of committee I'd like to be on.
Well, I think I think booze has fueled Westminster for many a century. A very popular committee that was. But we had convinced them, long story short, we actually found a really brilliant powerhouse of lawyers and lobbyists and local members that could really see the upside of creating a challenger movement to a bigger body of smaller numbers of distilleries and introducing competition. And that's really what we did. So we launched in 2009, having changed the law in 2008. So we'd influenced this a change in the UK law from 1821.
Amazing.
Which was, I mean, really in hindsight now, it's really astonishing that we were the first distillery for 200 years, the 12th distillery in the UK making gin, and it had inherited sort of this 200 years of gin distilling history. And we felt at that time, we had a right or a duty actually to the British people to introduce some of that methodology, that old school wisdom of the past into the brand. That to us was really important. And that was all in 2009.
And that was, I mean, we associate, I suppose, Hammersmith. You've got the big Fuller's Brewery on the roundabout there as you arrive into London, don't you, down the M4. But, you started in Hammersmith distilling gin there and you quickly outgrew it. And just a sort of symptom, I suppose, of your success. But you're still in West London proudly, just had to move to a bigger location.
That's right. We're now in Chiswick. We were in Hammersmith in the little microcosm of Ravenscourt Park, and we set up in this minute little workshop, a garage actually. And it was always meant to be temporary. And truth it was, we were really trying to hide it from people. I mean, obviously we were doing it above board and government, local planning. We were adhering to all of that, but we didn't actually want anyone to discover it because we were then going to move it once we'd got it right. And what's beautiful is sometimes when you hide something and someone discovers it and they see that you're very deliberately, not because you're doing anything wrong, but you're just not ready. These local bartenders heard about us from, some sort of leakage. And they came to find us. The next thing you knew, it just spread. And this was right as well. This was right when the credit crunch was, at its throat hold, on the British economy, where banks were closing, layoffs were everywhere. The news was punctuated with, as well, you would have remembered, with bad news stories, real horror, and massive layoffs. And actually, we ended up being picked up on the newswire for actually being a really exciting, newsworthy story that was related to British history, London history specifically. Two guys quit their jobs and invested their flat in it, their livelihoods in it, with parents and friends in the background kind of rolling their eyes and keeping their fingers crossed. And I don't mind telling you, so were we. The ice we were walking on felt very, very thin and creaky. And but somehow doing it together, and I'm sure maybe some of your listeners who've started businesses that actually, when you do it with somebody else, that you can hold each other's hands and you can bounce things off each other.
Well, I want to ask you about that because that can go one of two ways, can't it? I mean, Fairfax Hall, as I've read, is your sort of childhood best friend. The trust and the friendship and the bond of each other is there, but that can sometimes go wrong, can't it? If somebody wants to move, somebody wants to leave, somebody wants to take more risk, somebody wants to take more profit out of business. I don't know. There's plenty of pitfalls there. So, yes, it's lovely to have someone to hold hands with, I suppose, and take a leap of faith. But you can also end up losing a friend. So it's testament to your friendship that that's been a success.
Yeah, well, you're right to identify that. I mean, ultimately, we're very complementary in our skill sets, what we brought to the table and still do, actually. We're still involved. I was far more that outside extrovert, salesman, storyteller. We both did the marketing, but he was far more operations, finance, and that inner quieter wizard mind that was really powerful. And obviously, I think the stories when partnerships collapse or there's more friction and the output is attrition is when often the chips are down. When you don't agree on a way out of something. And we were so lucky, and we would look ourselves in the face, and mirrors in the face, friendships and stakeholders, and go, there's no small amount of good fortune that went into the business plan or the tapestry and the story. We are so clear about that this was, grit, brawn, energy, time, weekends, sacrifice, family, but actually it all paid off with a solid dose of good fortune, and the market was with us. Turns out everybody wanted more competition. Everybody wanted a bit more excitement.
What's the phrase? It's amazing how the harder you work, the luckier you become. There's only so much luck can carry you. There are, of course, the headlines that you read about, the aristocratic pair who have set up this business. I mean, was there an element of, having that sort of capital or sort of family behind you that you could fall back on that took away some of the other risk that other entrepreneurs experience? Or is that underselling what you've achieved? Or, or is that, part of your fortuitousness?
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I think the reference point would be that the ice was thin. We heard it crack all the while. And we knew that if it did crack, don't get me wrong, our families put in absolutely limited amount. Of this, the actual capital that we raised, which wasn't as much as people think, was actually it was from friends of friends, right? There's no question about it. We didn't go to institutional money, but we knew perhaps that if that ice cracked and we really did fall through it, that underneath that there would be the warm envelopment of families to cheer us up. We would have dusted ourselves off, and I hope brought some of that American spirit to it, or that sense of failure where you dust yourself off and pick yourself up. I mean, all needles of possibility were pointing very much at failure than they were to success. And but I would say there was a bit of that. I'm not frightened to say that there was I had a bed, right? I had a car, and I had a backstop, I suppose.
And now, where is it at, Sipsmith? Because I've seen you've been partnering as sponsors of Wimbledon since 2020. I mean, the brand is everywhere. I think the Wimbledon branding's still on the bottles at the moment, if people can see that. My entire Instagram feed was various people enjoying the hospitality of Sipsmith. It's going from strength to strength, I presume. Are you still very much involved in the day-to-day, or where's it at?
Yes, I am. I mean, in reverse order today, I'm involved slightly less. I still sit as the board's chairman. Fairfax is very much running the business. And our master distiller, who's also one of the founders and instrumental in the story, is 5 days a week as well. So I've stepped back a little bit and now focused my life a little bit more in Cornwall. But we went meteoric. After about 5-6 years, we were in sort of 30, 40 countries. And that was probably one of the things we did wrong. We probably could have done with being in at least only quarter of that and doubling down on the resources that we put to them, because we were shallow and wide rather than narrow and deep. We penetrated London and the wider metropolitan markets of England, which was very much our intent. Europe, we were a little bit more soil deep than that, nowhere else. And gin doesn't go off, not but a week or two ago, I was drinking a bottle of Gordon's from 1911 or something, so you can, it's amazing. I mean, these things are, they get more valuable with age, in theory.
Doesn't hang around long enough in our house to find out.
Too. But then we were approached by a couple of big companies who realized that gin category was on the surge, and those that didn't have a gin or what they felt was a sufficient surface area of gin, that they We were one of a handful of people around England that they approached to ask whether or not, there was an opportunity for an acquisition. And we said, well, we're not up for an acquisition, but you can take a stake in us because we quite like your route to market internationally. And then everybody said, no, you must be joking.
Interesting.
It's all or nothing. And so we went with this Suntory, this Japanese company, who shared a very long-term, long-range vision, horizontal thinking. And it's been turbulent but good, if you know what I mean. It's been great, very challenging, but really good. They're really solid people, and so I've stepped back a little bit. And of course, actually, worth touching on lockdown. I know some of your audience will all had very, very different experiences, both personally at home. For some, it would have been majestic, unforgettable. Others, it would have been very forgettable and so perhaps traumatic, particularly for business.
Yeah,
business went through a great deal. Now, the gin as well. Gin had an extraordinary time. It was like Icarus.
really.
That extraordinary Greek mythology, where Icarus decided he would just fly higher and higher and introduce more liquids and variants and would just allow.
Well, everyone was at home drinking,
grow.
right?
Absolutely. And of course, let's be clear, the yardarm was more towards 2:00 than it was 6. And we were the beneficiaries of that.
Yeah.
We've come out of lockdown and suddenly you've got moderation, you've got abstention, you've got mindfulness, you've got a hell of a lot more input into life where people just sense check what they were eating, what they were drinking, home decoration, home inspiration, family. We looked a little bit more inward than we did externally. And I think people's habits have largely remained rooted there. The category of gin retreated. It went backwards as quickly as it had surged. And we had to orientate ourselves very quickly around that change of tidal flow. And, with the rising tide lifts all boats, so does a retreating tide lower them against the tidal mark. And, we benefited and suffered. And so now we've retreated, we've retrenched, and we're in a seriously good place. And I think the sign of a really good brand is one that's resilient and one that can actually rise up to some of the challenges that the world faces.
Yeah, well, I think Sipsmith's going to be in the future for a long time to come, and I'm very pleased about that. But I want to hear more about I suppose the pivot for you, the sort of quiet reset in amongst all of that was, I suppose pulling on your heartstrings whilst you're having all this incredible success in London is your ancestral home. 10 generations have been at Trewithen, a grade 1 listed Palladian manor house, the stuff of, fairy tales, frankly, where you grew up. And you made that, was it a difficult decision to move from London, move the family down, and talk us through that whole change in chapter in your life?
It was an exciting one. And I always grew up knowing, rightly or wrongly, as a middle child, being the, because I've got an older sister, being the one actually that was going to inherit. It wasn't a question of sort of a primogeniture then. But so I'd always knew it was coming. And so I managed to get to know the cornerstones of what this is and, all the upside that comes with it. But the tremendous heavy weights that accompanies this as well, that I only learned afterwards, it's an absolute sinkhole. And,
for sure. I can imagine.
While the responsibility comes with real joy, real levels of privilege and insight, actually, it's quite heavy duty, and I really underestimated that. Luckily, I married this incredible woman called Kitty, who actually has Cornish roots, some of her family connected to the Isles of Scilly's, Tresco in particular. And so she knew Cornwall fairly well and was right up for the challenge. And I tend to throw myself at things. She is a quieter, wiser mind, albeit younger one than me, and really sense-checked what it was we wanted to do and that we should walk and not run. So when we moved down, we moved into the house and we lived in it. When my father, stepmother, and his younger family moved out, we moved in for 2 and a bit years. Really got to remind myself, but for Kitty to immerse herself in the character, in the noises, in the sensation, and the experience of living in this place. And that was when we took the decision, and only then, to bring some really interesting young folk to help us. And in particular, I'm referring to these designers, Salvesen and Graham, that were really trying to cut their teeth in this. And they were young friends of friends, and they had a very classic yet modern, not modern at all, but
I was just going to say not modern, but I suppose of our time outlook as well.
Of our time, and managed to frame what was really important of the old and not touch it, whereas bringing in a sort of a fresher, brighter touch and streaks of us that come through in small sort of distinctive ways rather than sort of largely very different. So touching on what I said before.
What people might not realise about Trewithen is it's open to the public. And when you lived in it as a child, it was almost sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, museum-like in one half. And then the family was sort of in a sort of, as so many of these sort of as country houses are, sort of squeezed into a sort of an estate. And it was very much your feeling that actually you wanted to live in this house and bring the bones back, to life with your family enjoying it, but also the public still coming in because of, quite frankly, as you say, it's a sinkhole. That's a necessary part of keeping it going.
Yeah, it really is. I only smiled halfway through that because I remember as a kid throwing sweets and putting banana skins out behind the sofas in the view that somebody might trip up on them. But yeah, when we came to the planning side of trying to convince not just county planners, local authorities, but historic England and the Georgian group, who are a very influential stakeholder in these kinds of estate buildings. But they have learned to become very sensitive and empathetic towards the residents. And when they'd heard that actually we wanted to move beyond that threshold, which one side was this sort of quite contained old rattly place to a mausoleum essentially, and lift off the white sheets, dust it off down and really try to creep back into the house to bring that to life. It was the Georgian group, to their credit, that really understood what we wanted to do, how we wanted to do it. And they were the ones that convinced both historic England and the planners more generally that actually this was absolutely right for the betterment of the house, for the protection of the history and the fabric of it, and the storytelling. And they, we did our best to convince them, but it's often a secondary stakeholder. It's the one that actually convinces those people that do have to make the fundamental decisions.
How does that work in reality then? Because obviously, you've gone through, I don't know how long that process took of, persuading all the various groups and authorities to let you do what you wanted to do, and then getting the designers to come up with something that you liked. But the reality of living with your kids in somewhere where the public are coming in, I mean, talk me through what that's like. Are you sometimes eating your lunch and there's a group of the WI marching through, or what's the reality of that?
Yeah, I mean, they don't come into the kitchen, they don't come into our sitting room, but they go into every other room on the downstairs level. There's about 6 rooms that they're able to go into. The tour takes an hour. You can hear them, you can feel them, you can sense them. And I have come, thanks to Kitty, to really appreciate their presence and decide, instead of pushing against an upping tide, to really go, instead of trying to resist it, trying to embrace it, because heritage is something that really needs to be celebrated, really needs to be learned from, brought forward, and the best of it brought forward. And these days, I think the way that we're communicating with everyone is through storytelling. So the lived reality of it is that we're trying to take some of these hidden relics of very specialized books, paintings, which frankly aesthetically are not pleasing on the eye. These rather austere, I don't know what you can see behind me, these rather austere and unfriendly ancestors.
Relatives of yours, probably.
Yeah. They don't look down on us favorably. They're sort of rolling their eyes on this sort of 300-year-old canvas, but they tell a story. And if we can help tell the story, I think it tells a story of history and the importance of holding on to that for future generations and for those coming through the system. I mean, heritage generally is on the up. You need to look at some of the data in the tourist section that's really looking at heritage is as exciting a growth as it is some of the sort of rather more modern tourist sectors. And that's because there is a new generation have an appetite to double click on this and really consume it.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I can imagine overseas, I can imagine the Americans just absolutely loving Trewithen and having a little insight. Hopefully they'll love this chat as well. But I think it's so lovely that you're attributing Kitty with having sort of helped you come to terms with that, because actually you're the one who was used to it. You grew up with people in the house, and presumably you understood fully their role. But how funny that Kitty was the one who's taught you to make peace with it.
Yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, she was the one, I guess, that didn't have any change to experience. For her, it was like, sleeves up, let's go. And then she was like, wait a minute, why are you dragging your feet? Why are you quite anti this thought? And I think it's because I sort of grew up with it, really. It was always seemed to be an invasion of privacy. And now I think we counter that with exactly the points that I made before, that actually we are privileged to live here. We're surrounded by extraordinary culture, and we have a right and a duty, responsibility here. And I think a counterweight to what I had before, which is really a renewed energy towards its promotion more widely.
And we've talked a lot about the house, but actually Trewithen, it sits in the middle of this incredible estate, mature trees. And in fact, some of them, I was reading about plant hunters in your family, however long ago, where they were going to the Himalayas and to extraordinary places, far-flung corners of the globe, bringing back these exotic varieties of plants. And not only is that incredible and a privilege to live and walk amongst, but also a responsibility, I'd imagine.
Hugely. And actually, that's the bit that I love the most now, is the garden. I mean, I'm 49, and sometimes the things that I'm into now remind me of something of the preserve of a 70-plus-year-old. But
no, I'm the same. I'm in that zone as well. Actually, I'm obsessed with the garden.
I absolutely love it.
So do I.
Learning the Latin. But part of that is understanding the genesis of where these plants actually came from. And that, again, touches on storytelling. Our family here funded in the late 1800s some real pioneering spirit to head over to the Far East, but China, Japan, Philippines, and Korea, Vietnam, to go on these expeditions to bring back seedlings and cuttings and saplings in these brigs, these sort of ships that used weighed down ferns as the ballast, and it ended up going into about 6 different Cornish gardens, because the owners all understood that our climate down here in Cornwall is so special, so temperate, and so suitable to the types of these stunning and very, very rare at the time species such as magnolia, camellias, rhododendrons, and such like. And so Trewithen has retained that sense of brilliance and wonder, and we've actually enhanced that. And there are other gardens too. So that's the bit that I've really thrown myself at, is really trying to broaden the appeal and the excitement and the tours and the storytelling that accompanies that. Yeah, I love it. I really do. Really,
yeah, I can tell you light up actually when you talk about it. And so, when people come to Cornwall, they think about the Eden Project. They might, want to go to Land's End, but really Trewithen, you're trying to put it on the map of places that people might come and visit. And I suppose you would say the garden, as much as, the house, is a big attraction.
Definitely. And when I think thinking about well-being, mindfulness, touching nature, gardens do all of that in one foul swoop, in one unforgettable hit. These places strike deep into the chord of an intergenerational sect. And Trewithen is so perfectly located. We are right slap bang in a gravitational centre of Cornwall. And so we're on a thoroughfare and easy to get to. And it's stunning. I think we surprise people. People are naturally gravitated to the beauty in the wilderness and the feralness of the coastline. To surf, to sail, to eat, to relax. But actually, there is so much within Cornwall. And you know what? I'm such a champion of the duchy. We call it a duchy. Others call it a county. But, we are a duchy. And it's such a special place. It really needs a leg up. And there is so much more, Isabel, to Cornwall than coastline, clotted cream, agriculture. We have so much to offer, and we love and we cherish, contrary to popular belief, that actually we really do welcome visitors, second homeowners, past family members, remigrators. Come, relove, reconnect, celebrate with every bit of dynamic element that Cornwall has to offer, because it's fabulous.
And I suppose it's no coincidence then, given how passionately you feel about the duchy and the fact that, you know, you're 10th generation Cornish yourself, that the king asked you to be his high sheriff in the county. You are the high sheriff of Cornwall. Just explain to, you know, Joe in Hull or whoever it might be, what exactly that means, because, you know, obviously it sounds like a huge honor, but what's the day-to-day, apart from wearing fancy clothes? 'Cause I've seen some pictures of you, which again, I'm sure the Yanks absolutely love. But what's the day-to-day reality of being the High Sheriff of Cornwall?
Well, actually, I just handed it over to the next. Yes, I have. But I had the honor of being High Sheriff of Cornwall for 1 year, which every county has a High Sheriff, and it's a tenure. It's an honorary tenure that you hold for 1 year. And actually, yeah, a little bit of script and explanatory around it. It is a role. It's the longest running secular role in the country. So it actually, obviously, there was a break in the British monarchy with Thomas Cromwell, but actually, if you go back, it started around about 930, 940 with a king called King Alfred, and all his shires, as they were known at the time, were in absolute collapse and social unrest, and he got some lords in the local areas to become a force to protect the king, his interests, to collect taxes, to administer law and order. And indeed, they were given powers that hadn't been distributed before. They had money to set up what was called a posse comitatus, which was the genesis of the police force. Oh, right. So every county now, they're called, have police forces that all come from this thing called posse comitatus, and they were to protect the king's interests, which then later became the government, and then they changed to become the police force. And so, look, fast forwarding now, to about the 40s and 1940s, 1950s, where we held all of these rights and duties and responsibilities because we administered capital punishment, because we collected taxes. It was a desperately unpopular role to take. So they actually took a lot of the formality, the responsibilities away from it. The king at the time, King Edward, decided it was really important. It just was kept on as an honorary role and a celebratory role, and it became an ambassador role, really, to represent law and order as a patron. So we oversaw, still in patron terms, everything to do with the criminal justice system as it's known today. So from the police force, community, to prisons, and magistrates and crown courts, that all fell under our jurisdiction and still our patronage. But it's way more than that now. We celebrate anything to do with the sort of the military that might be centered. We do loads of community stuff. That's really where I wanted to lean into. Was Cornwall has a third of its county, third of its population is involved in voluntary work, which is way higher than any other county in the country. Yeah, the national index is around 19%.
Wow.
Cornwall's at about 33, 34, and that's the 22 ONS National Statistics Survey. And so Cornwall's really proud of that. We haven't got a lot of money, but we've got a lot of people who are really willing to go front foot forward on the front line to help. And so my job was to thank people, to shine a light on those that really understood where the darker shadows were of Cornwall, and to celebrate the local unsung hero, whether that be from a local hall to someone individually delivering food, to packing, working in a food bank, to larger institutions that have for a long time kept Cornwall's grassroots funding, like the Cornwall Community Foundation, going. And then I particularly led, and I'll end here, but I particularly lent into a remarkable charity called A Band of Brothers, which was all about supporting young men. We mentor young men coming out of the criminal justice system to reorbit their community. So they would have all had issues maybe growing up. Most of them would have been fatherless. Many would have gone through the care home. Some of them automatically almost end up, on the criminal justice list and going into prison or not. And we mentor these young men. And Cornwall's got a particularly high level of crime that stems from that. And sadly, suicide as well. We've got the highest level of that. So I really lent into that. I loved the work that we did. I loathed wearing velvet and tights.
Please tell me you didn't have to wear velvet and tights when you were meeting these bands of brothers. I mean, that how to make yourself
No.
stand out. But actually, on a serious note, how were you received? Because a lot of these people have had pretty rubbish cards dealt them in life, and you've been dealt a much better hand. But I suppose the royals, they have that as well, don't they? They're going out and doing incredible things and mixing with people from all walks of life, and are generally well received because they don't have to do that. Was that your experience, or
It
was there
really
sometimes
was.
a bit of a, oh, who's this toff?
I don't doubt there was a bit of that. And I felt a real sense of imposter syndrome, as I have done a lot with. I don't think it's a unique problem to me, but as a young, and I'm a very young high sheriff. This is normally the preserve of someone in the late 50s, frankly late 60s and older, and it's very unusual that it should fall into the hands of someone in their late 40s. And so I felt all the more impostership than someone might ordinarily do. But it was an honor and a privilege, and one that I decided to overcome by really leaning in to the role in a far more energetic, non-stop kind of way. So if there was to be any sense of forgiveness that a sort of middle-class toff that was coming in with this role could be somewhat forgiven. But, I also entered it with reverence, with vulnerability, with a real sense of humanness as well. I tried to wear the outfit as seldom as I possibly could. And but yeah, I was packing boxes all the way from welcoming royals and dignitaries to building bricks and houses and shelters. I think if you're seen to be really throwing yourself and the kitchen sink at problems that you see and deem to be worthy and causeful, there's an awful lot of understanding and empathy. And I think the Cornish, the beauty about them is that, they can see through it. They know that a lot of those, inherited wealth actually do a lot of good.
For sure.
We really are at the coalface of affordable housing. We're really there at charity and philanthropy. And I think if you're there with mud on your nails and breaking a back and bead of sweat, it does help.
For sure. And Sam, you talked about imposter syndrome there. Was that just in relation to your time as the High Sheriff, or is that something that you've had from time to time, as many people have? And if so, why do you think that might be?
I think if there's anybody listening to this that has had imposter syndrome, go like that now, even though somebody might not be looking. And I would think many, I mean, you yourself being in a position of public facing, question to you, and how did you overcome it? Yeah, I mean, I found it overwhelming at times, sleep depriving, but at the same time, it's I asked myself, is this feeling helpful? Is it useful energy that I'm consuming down playing my role? Well, somebody has deemed me worthy to wear the tights and velvet, or take a position of responsibility. So I've got a choice. Either I can lean into it and be damned the worst. And of course, you only need to look at social media, and everybody's damning everyone, for everything. It's tragic, it's unnecessary. And then, of course, there are those that want to celebrate and scream and bang the gong with you, and those are the voices that you've got to hear, and those that you help drown out the impostership syndrome. But what was your experience of dealing with that?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I think I still deal with it all the time. I mean, launching this podcast is a bit scary as well, but I always take the view pressure's a privilege. If you're feeling a bit of pressure, then something good's probably happening, and hopefully it's bringing out the best in you. And you just have to fake it till you make it. How many cliches can I sneak in there? I don't know. But that's how I deal with it. But going back to, how you were talking about how much you love the estate at Trewithen and being outside, I get a lot of strength, I think. When I was presenting daily, getting up at 3 a.m, my sort of recovery was getting out to the veg patch, getting some soil under my nails. I really found nature really healing, not least because it gives perspective and makes you realize you're tiny compared to the great mighty oak or whatever it might be. So that's been my kind of outlook on life. But I wonder if your sort of way of dealing with things and coping things was important when, on a personal note, you encountered problems. I mean, we've talked about Kitty, you've got 3 lovely children, and Eddie, I think he's your youngest.
Yes.
Been a story there, hasn't there, which has been very difficult. Tell us a bit about lovely Eddie.
Yeah, well, the good news is that he's fine and thriving and a real menace, and somewhere 2 or 3 rooms away from me painting a picture. But Yeah, it was touch and go. He was diagnosed with ALL, leukemia, a really horrible strain of leukemia just at the beginning of, just before we went into lockdown, actually. And yeah, mother's instinct, Isabel. Kitty saw a paleness and some bruising and, a real discontent. And there was something not right. We went to the doctors, they couldn't find anything. We went back, they said, there's nothing wrong with your kid. And
Really?
honestly, the power of mother's instinct to overrule the rational thinking of, human error of a doctor. My goodness, we blame no one in what
Yeah.
happened, not least of which because there's a happy ending. But, she charged into the emergency room at 3 a.m, having met a mother who'd had a diagnosed leukemic child. And she said, I think your kid has got what mine has and is going through thing. And so, honestly, at 3 a.m, she went in and sure enough, the doctors thought there's nothing wrong with your kid, there's nothing wrong with your kid. And then there was a nurse that picked her up and saw Kitty in floods of tears, took her up to the CLIC, Children's Leukemia and Cancer Ward. And yeah, long story, horrendously short, he was instantly diagnosed with ALL, went to spend 6 weeks up at Bristol Infirmary. And yeah, it was feeling horrendous, very, very scary. And that is when it's quite grounding. That is when you come off your high horse and you realize what's important, what matters most, a regrounding and a sharp recalibration of life. And as you say, all the cliches that you want to throw at it just come bursting to the fore. So we went in of ourselves. I pulled out of work. And we hunkered down here. We did exactly what we were told. And the lockdown was, frankly, frightening. But at the same time, it was all the more reason for us to close the doors, become a unit, become a family. And we really, really locked ourselves away because nobody understood the relationship of COVID. And then we went really on 4 years of chemotherapy, touch and go stuff. It was always looking okay as we came out of that first bit of trauma. But honestly, the care and everything that accompanied it from the NHS and all that, eye-wateringly good. And of course, mother's instinct.
And Sam, how old was Eddie when all of this started? And also just, give us a little insight. And obviously, I mean, I'm a mum. I feel a bit sick just hearing you talk about it because I can only imagine. What was the moment like when presumably Kitty phoned you to say, this is what's happening? Talk me through what went through your mind.
I got a phone call at 3 a.m, and she said, I think you better come home. I'm going to emergency services. Eddie was 3, just turned 3.5 maybe. And so, yeah, maybe at 6 o'clock or something, she called me. She goes, I think you better come home. So I found a flight from Heathrow to Newquay, and I was on that bus that you take from a terminal to the aircraft. And she rang me, and I picked up the phone, and she said, I'm really sorry, the tests have come through and he's got leukemia. And I just remember tunnel vision and a coldness and a lump in the throat. And I went white and shaded pale, and I sat down, and somebody caught my wrist and just said, are you okay? And sorry, it's quite overwhelming just reminding myself of it, actually. And anyway, got there. I was fine. We got there and saw Kitty, and yeah, that was horrendous. That was that moment which I wish on no one.
Yeah.
And then of course you get yourself together and you go, right, come on, shoulders broad, let's go, carry everyone, pick up the slack, and off we went. And yeah, you wish it on no one, but I would tell you that we're a stronger unit, perhaps in a different way. That we've got the scars to prove it. And Eddie is a legend, and the kids are better. I don't know. It's fun, and it's fun to recall it in a very different. Fun's the wrong word, but it's
important to remember it.
Recollection of it.
And I'm sorry for making you feel a bit overwhelmed, and totally understand why you would. But what must be awful about the whole thing, with a sick child, with a sick spouse, whatever people at home might be listening to this or watching this and resonating, is that feeling of being out of control. There you are, like, had this huge business success. You've got this wonderful home that you're having a great time sorting out. Yes, it comes with pressure. Yes, there's all the stuff we've talked about. But at the end of the day, you just want your children to outlive you, don't you? That's the number one thing every parent wants, and they want them to thrive. And you have absolutely no control. I mean, that's the most horrible feeling I can imagine that any parent could ever have. And also, I suppose, trying to be strong, because Kitty's there, at the bedside, I presume, day in, day out, and trying to be strong for Kitty as well, and for each other.
But you draw on each other. And the other thing was that there were so many parents that in our ward that were going through the same thing from all different socioeconomic walks of life, and how grounding you can draw on all sorts of sources of support, but first-hand experience, the people going through it was the most powerful thing. And I like to think that we were also a source of support for those at the time going through it, those that we still, and people go, oh, you should talk to Sam and Kitty. They went through a near horror moment too with their kid. And that's a privilege too, to be able to play a part in playing a supporting role for them.
What's the outlook for Eddie? Is he going to be perfectly fine now? Yeah, he's out of remission and all of that.
Absolutely. In remission and a complete menace. And exactly what we want,
Good, double thumbs up to that. I like it. Fantastic. Well, on that note, let's do some rapid fire questions and get a little insight. I mean, we've got a pretty good insight into who you are, I think, but I've got to put the specs on now because I'm an old lady. But we want to know a little bit about what makes you tick. So you have to give your instant answer, this or that, basically. If you feel like both, which a few of my guests have done, I'll give you one or two. But, if you can go with your gut, I'm going to put the pressure on. Gin and tonic or martini?
Oh, martini.
Night owl or early bird?
Night owl.
Last word or the first laugh?
Probably end up, my wife would say last word.
Burn it down or gently let it go?
Burn it down.
Live to work or work to live?
Work to live.
Host the party or slip out early?
Host.
Stiff upper lip or belly laugh?
Belly laugh.
Save it forever or give it away?
Give it away.
Full English or foraged brunch?
Oh, full English, come on.
Always early or fashionably late?
Always early.
Good for you. Three-piece suit or salt-streaked swimmers?
Both.
No, okay. You can have one. I'll give you both.
One
Rule
under
book
the other.
Or instinct?
Instinct.
Cold sea swim or fireside dram?
Oh, sea swim. And then a fireside dram.
Okay, fair. Family tradition or new frontier?
A new frontier.
There we go. Some unexpected responses in there. I'd have thought you'd have gone for gently let it go, but I'm burn it down as well, so I love that about you. And family tradition or new frontier, I'd have thought you might have gone trad.
Well, I think I'm trying to break out of a mold, and I like that unshackled bit of liberation in there. Don't hold on too tightly with a white knuckle to the past. And I think we've got to let some of the new creep in.
Yeah, for sure. And whilst we're doing this or that and favourite colours, I do want to talk a little bit about my lovely sponsors at Mylands, because they have the Royal Warrant, the Royal Seal of Approval. They're famous, of course, for painting the 007 sets and the Harry Potter sets. And they've got some really big name interior designers. Kitty will be all over, Beata Herman and all these sorts of people. And they wanted to know what your two favourite colours were from their range. They're known as the House of Colour. And I love that you've come up with a couple with a bit of a theme to it as well. So just bring me up to speed on your two favourite Mylands colours.
Yeah, but and this is very genuine, by the way. I've had a good long flirt with some of these colours, and I've gone for copper green, not just because I think the copper's fabulous, but the copper is our distillery. Sipsmith is the green. It's our colour, so I've gone for that, and I think there's a mystery and a magic in the element of copper. And I would imagine that probably shines through in that Myland paint. And I'm so into beehives, but not just beehives. So there's a beehive color, I think.
Yeah.
And the beehive, I make beehives here for their habitat. I never take their honey. And there are two types of beekeepers, those that create the habitat and those that want the honey. And I'm the former, and that color really reminded me of the shade of the honeycomb that we look inside but never touch. So
Oh, wow.
that's exactly why I'm going to pick those two colors.
I love that. And I think you were saying the copper green's number 36 and number 200 London plain is their beehive color. Amazing stuff. I just want to ask you a bit more about the bees there, because my children just made me watch, I'm probably going to get the name wrong, but there's an animated film, isn't there, called, is it Bees? And it's basically about the bees having their honey stolen. And actually, for the first time, I am ashamed to say a Disney film pricked my conscience, but should we not be eating honey?
Well, we can eat honey. We just can't, we can't remove all the honey for them, which they require in the winter. And we wonder why populations have decreased. And I think it's one of which is we take that honey. The second thing is those white boxes that are knee high are not thermal. They're very low thermal performance. Bees have to work very hard to keep the heat in there, and they don't want to be at knee height. Bees never like to fly into something at knee level. That's where the dew point is, and that's where all the cold temperature is. So they have to work 20-25% harder, and therefore they need that energy, that honey, in order to provide that energy for the warmth. And so we need beehives to be higher than our waistline at a minimum, which is typically above that dew point. Which means there's at least a sort of, I can't remember what the percentage difference is in temperature, but high enough to warrant us considering it. We've been building these things called rocket hives, which are on 3 legs, built with a remarkable guy called Matt Somerville from Somerset. Look him up. He's called Be Kind.
Oh, right.
And he is absolutely protecting and changing the world in which bees live. And we're happy to be a champion of him.
That's amazing. Well, I'm a big fan of bees, so I will definitely look him up. Thank you for educating me about that. We touched on it a little bit, and I want to finish with sort of, if this podcast has a literary theme of new chapters, let's talk about the sort of final chapter in your book. I'm not writing you off. I mean, I'm just saying, what does the happy ending look like, I suppose, and what's next for you? And somebody mentioned to me that you are a keen wild swimmer, and you chose, in the question about whether it was a fireside dram, you chose the cold sea swim. So this is something you're passionate about.
I'm not alone in this country, and maybe others besides, that have learned the joys and the pleasures of overcoming one's initial fear to jump into unknown waters, fresh or salt. And I discovered that during lockdown. I mean, being Cornish, you're always not going to be far from a hole or the sea. And I ended up choosing the sea, and a friend of mine was suffering greatly from grief, and I learned about the power of the different hormones that are released when we get into contrast therapy, as it's often called, and to help overcome grief very naturally. And also when we go into the sea, and I tend to swim when it's dark or light first thing in the morning, all these different hormones come out that wouldn't, cortisol, endorphins, adrenaline, things that make you alert, things that make you open up and feel very vulnerable, because you are frankly very vulnerable. Yeah, exactly. And so I've been taking groups of friends out swimming, and we've been having chats in the sea, out and beyond just a waist height. We've really been swimming and coming back, and the body temperature continues to fall. The body goes through what's called the drop. Even when you're wrapped up in a bundle 20, 30 minutes later, your body temperature still falls, and you end up being really open, perhaps because you just want the conversation to come over. You just end up, it's like a truth serum. And that's what I found cold water as therapy. And I hope others, perhaps, even if one person who listens to this chooses cold water just to immerse themselves in, to help overcome a negative feeling, a bit of depression, a bit of grief, a bit of sorrow, maybe even anger. Just give it a go, because it works. You'll get bloody cold, even no matter how tried and tested you do it, but just get in there, and it's just vibrant and enlivening.
Do the family ever join you? Because I don't know, do girls like being really cold? I'm not very good at being cold.
Oh, yeah, no, they do. I was lounging around watching the golf on telly yesterday. My kids burst in and said, "Come on, let's go swim in the ponds. We've got these old lakes." And down I went, and we went till I felt all the better for it. And I didn't miss the golf. So yeah, it's a great thing. Get in there.
Well, let's finish just finally on the future for Trewithen. I suppose the kids. Your eldest is a daughter, is that right? Isadora. So will
Yes.
she inherit, the first female to inherit from you?
I think there is a chance. I think she has shown the most interest, and she's like, presumably I'm going to be taking on the house. I'm the oldest child, and I'm going. Of course, that's logic for you, And I think we've said that those that will pay the most interest in it are the ones, and perhaps incentivize them by doing well at school. Those that do the best at school will obviously most likely take it on. But I'm also teaching them that this is a real heavy weight. This is a real yoke around the shoulders that comes with an invisible responsibility and pressure that sometimes I'm not very good at processing. And so whoever they marry will need to bring that sense of resilience and sounding board and critical friend to help them deal with that. But yeah, and you can't live on these places anymore. You've got to have an income and do some things in the outside world, not just rely on this. Otherwise,
It'd be
you're
your
just
greatest wish, I suppose, that it carries on in the family for many more generations.
I think so. I would like that in whatever shape or form it is. And of course, this great word diversity, is needed. You can no longer just have land for agriculture or housing. There's lots of different diversification that's required in life. And that is no less true when you've got an estate to run here, both in terms of income in order to help cover the cost of running something really quite so expensive as this, but also just in terms of the richness and sense of resilience that brings to an estate. And that sense of wisdom, intelligence, and cultural powership that comes from it, I think is something not to be forgotten and to be embraced. And I think that's what's great. And great about Cornwall too. Yes. I think I'd love my last word, if I said I'd get it, to be about Cornwall and the power of Cornwall and unity and the community and how welcoming I like to think we all are of those outside of it and everything that we have to offer them to come and place and visit us and come and see us at Trewithen.
Oh, I absolutely will. I absolutely will. I'm absolutely ashamed that I haven't been before. Sam, thank you so much for bringing your energy and your honesty and, telling us all about the resilience and the reinventions and the huge successes, of course, that have led to your extraordinary and fascinating life. Really appreciate you coming on my podcast. The first bloke as well in season 1. There is a badge of honor for you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And to you, the listeners, if today's episode sparked a thought, a shift, or even the courage to turn your own page, do go for it and make sure that you share this with someone else who might need it. Do follow me on Instagram at New Chapters Podcast, or you can head to the website, which is of course linked there. And my final thought is, until next time, please be kind to the version of you that got you here and be bold for the one that you're becoming.